The good old clap, take one.
That's right.
How many of you knew what you wanted to be when you were 7 years old? I did. I wanted to be world champion.
Hey, is there honesty involved in this podcast? Can we be honest?
You can shut your fucking lips.
And then I'll just say, put them up, what? Let's go.
He's like, you look too pretty on the wave. Get ugly.
We can talk about DMT if you want.
I thought you were boxing.
Joe Turpel, Lavaz, and a fellow snowy plover joining us on today's episode of The Lineup. Thanks, man.
Dave, this is a special treat. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Well, so I usually
proud snowy plover, by the way.
Yeah, proud snowy plover. Of course. You know, I usually run through like a series of questions, but this is actually the first time I've done one in the flesh in so long. But, you know, I know where you are today. We're both here in Santa Monica. I know who you're with. You're with me and our producer, Ryan Fawcett. But how are you doing today?
I'm happy. I'm feeling good. I don't get to come to the office that often. It's great. It's pretty empty. And yeah, I'm stoked. It's been a wild run I've been on, but I'm happy and the family's good. And I'm actually dying to surf. You know, when you're around it so much, you're kind of like close to it, but yourself, you haven't been in the water yet just because of travel and being on the other side of it. It's I'm getting to that feeling where I'm waiting for some waves.
That's always been the thing I've understood working on tour as a surfer, because everyone's like, oh man, you're so lucky. And it's like, yes, very fortunate. But if you don't get a surf in the morning and you don't have time to do it at the end of the day, it's a particular kind of torture because you're just getting hyped by the world's best surfing all day. And you're being like, I really would like to go surfing. And if you don't make time for it, you're a little bit screwed. So you haven't
true.
surfed today is what you're saying.
I haven't surfed today, and I haven't surfed, and the North Shore was flat, and I was moving. So it just, these moments to get in the water just haven't opened up. And with work and schedules and traveling, I'm on a little dry spell. Yeah.
Well, hopefully that dry spell ends with these upcoming events in Mexico and Tahiti. But, you know, before we get into the who, what, when, where, how, and why of Joe Turpel, I thought we'd start by getting your take on some news that broke last week, which was we announced the 2022 Championship Tour and Challenger Series calendars. And the key takeaways are that those calendars will represent the maiden season, for the redesigned 3-tier competition system. And so the CT will be 10 events, all combined. We're going to do Pipe at the end of January, Sunset Beach, Super Tubos, Bells Beach, and Margaret River. Then we have the mid-year cut, where we sharpen the field by a third. And then we go G-Land, Trestles, Rio, J-Bay, Tahiti, before the big bad world title deciding WSL finals at the end of that. So first things first, what's your take on the redesigned CT calendar, and what events are you particularly looking forward to seeing?
There's so much to take in. I mean, from the cut, you know, we talked about the cut in the old days. It's back. That's just so exhilarating to have pressure and storylines so early, where every heat's going to matter even more than it already does, but it just creates instant pressure. So that's just insane. I'm looking forward to that. I'm really happy that Lowers is a regular season event. You know, that's really fun to look forward to. I feel like it deserves to be there. It provides just that high performance battle of rights and lefts. And for a play-by-play commentator, it's one of the best to call. You know, you think about lefts, rights, every turn's different. You know, you're calling Tahiti, it's a barrel every time. That actually pushes you in more ways than one. But that's really fun. G-Land, gosh, we've been waiting for this. You know, that comeback has just been this slow roll. And there's going to be people that don't make the cut. They're going to be just, I can't believe I'm missing G-Land. So there's some incredible events. Standing out to me is definitely G-Land and Lowers. And that's going to be fun. I can't wait.
It's funny. Like, so my day job is actually working on this stuff and working on it with, you know, Jesse and Eric and that. And before our Surf Ranch event, we probably had about 60 independent conversations with the surfers and their team managers up in Lemoore. And it is really funny. Everyone's really, really hyped about the calendar. To a person, they're like, are we still doing the cut? It's like, yep. Like, not a single one of them is going to be like, yep, that's better. Even the ones that know they're going to be in the top field, even though it probably will be demonstrably better with a whittled down field in those 5 events. Everyone still is kind of a survivalist in the sense of like, well, I'd really like to have 10 events. But it is funny. And I think that different to when the cut was implemented back in 2010, 2011. I swear, and as a Gudauskas fan, I love Tanner, but the amount of times people are like, well, the cut really screwed Tanner Gudauskas over all those years ago. I said, I understand, but it actually resulted in a better system down the line. They're not falling off the existence of the Earth anymore. They're actually landing on this really robust 8-event Challenger Series that starts with Snapper Rocks in May, goes to Manly, Bolito, U.S. Open, Ericeira, Landis in the southwest of France, Piha, and Haleiwa. So contrary to what it was back in 2011, this is actually the middle of the 3 tiers that are being redesigned.
What a lineup for a Challenger Series. Like, that's insane. And to kick it off, Snapper is a Challenger Series event. That is just instant when you get the feeling of your cut, and then you're going there to get yourself back on tour. I think it's great. And just to rewind to that first midseason cut, the idea of those One World rankings were kind of along the lines of you're not disappearing back then either. It was sort of like you still have this high seed, and we saw CJ win the Azores, and he's like, oh my God, I'm back. So I feel like it was in motion back then and a little misunderstood. And at the time, it was sort of like, let's move on and iron out the kinks. And yeah, so I'm really looking forward to people understanding, as it gets in motion of they didn't make the cut. It's not over, you know, and now the Challenger Series is going to have a ton of attention, which will be great. We almost went to New Zealand when everything got shut down, and there were so many people that were so excited to go, including Carissa Moore, who just won Manly before that season she was going to take off. So that list of Challenger Series events, I think, gives so much value to those warriors on the QS that want to get where they want to be. That
was the big double take that all the CT surfers gave us when we listed out the Challenger Series calendar. They're like, really? Like, that's actually kind of like its own CT in a way. You got plenty of them. They're like, I'm going to do all 18 events. It's like, sure, you can, not knock yourself out. I think that's a good point about the bones of this were there back in 2011. The reason that, and I was involved in these conversations on the technical committee side, the reason that we reverted back to the old system wasn't because we didn't like what was happening, but it had a destabilization problem in the sense of the schedule was year to year. We couldn't balance out the opportunity on either side of that rotation. And so until we did, we decided we're going to go back to the older system. But now we actually have, 3-year permits in a lot of these locations, multi-year contracts, and really kind of stabilizing those operating rhythms in terms of if you're a surfer, where you need to go for the next few years, how to get to the world title event. And I think it's going to be a lot different.
I think a really cool part of it too is if you make that mid-season cut, you're safe for 2023. That's a big one too, where all of a sudden those surfers that survive that cut, they not only get to surf G-Land, lowers, everything else, but they're just full steam ahead, mental processes. You're on the championship tour, put everything in to being a part of that Final Five.
Totally. I'm with you on that. Being a resident of the North Shore right now, you're as close to a neighbor as 11-time world champion Kelly Slater has. Do you think that next season is going to be Kelly's final full season?
Wow.
What has he told you over the fence?
Yeah.
In confidence.
It's crazy because personally for Kelly, I didn't like the questions of when are you moving on that he was getting back in 07, 08, 09, a long time ago, where it's like, hey, is this it? And there's this idea of like, oh, are you going to end up on top? People almost wanted to write the swan song for him, and when he's the GOAT, that makes sense. You want to kind of put your input in there. I don't want him to have it all said and done. And my feeling is for him, I don't really think he's ready for that chapter. I think he's still so competitive and he feels great. I don't really think that his life needs that break from the tour. I think he's shown us that all the time. So in my conversations with him, we might not go straight to that point really ever, but I don't think he's done. And unless he's offered some amazing wild card ride where he can start choosing events that he'd like until he's done, I think he'd be really excited about that. But I think he's always going to want to be involved in pipe. He's going to always want to be in the events that he wants. And if that means keeping his spot on tour, I think he'll figure out how to do it.
It feels like that has been where at least his expressed psychology's been lately, where he's like, well, unless someone rips my spot off me and I don't requalify, like, why wouldn't I come back? And it's interesting too, because I think a lot of the surfers recognize that during this COVID season, the different events really impacted the rankings, like at every stage, because it was the first time in 20 years that the pacing of the season had changed. And I think you're going to see that next year too, especially with someone like Kelly, like starting the event arguably in the best month of the year for pipe, late January, early February. Sunset Beach, he's got a prickly relationship with, but Super Tubos, another barrel event, Bells and Margaret River, where he has a ton of experience. Like, it could be a system for him where he's set up quite well throughout the years. And he might, by the time we get there, be the only surfer who's ever competed at G-Land that's still on tour when we end up there next May.
And he'll be there as a threat to win. It's,
right.
Those are the waves that always stand out these days, where, at 49, what would be, even 50 next year, G-Land, Pipe, Tahiti, those are all events for him to win, And so I think, with Pipe being the starting block, just like this year, I mean, he was third in the world
right
after Pipe. And so if he wins, say he wins Pipe, it's all of a sudden he's in the mix. Maybe he'll be in that luxurious position to miss an event maybe doesn't want to go to, but I feel like he's just going to feel this out. He likes change. He'll be looking at a new tour with fresh eyes, because it'll have actually a new experience for even him after 30 years of competing.
It's interesting that you say that. Like, I think now that Pipe's the opening event, it's maybe a little bit out of his hands, because he's like, well, I'm going to keep doing well there and I'm going to keep wanting to do the tour. It was like when everyone wanted him to retire, right, to give him that swan song chapter. But then Quicksilver always opened the season at Snapper Rocks. He always went because that was his sponsor. He often did very well there. And when he did very well there, people were like, you got to go for another world title. So he's like, I guess I'm on tour again. Like, he's probably retired more than anyone else in the sport so far.
It's a really good point. Because, when you think back to those years where he was getting the question a lot, those questions were valid at that time, because you kind of didn't know. You didn't know if he was going to come to J-Bay. You didn't know where his head was at. And at the end of the day, when he'd look at points and go, here's another title year for me. And
right.
Like it or not, he was like, I might skip that and I'll win. I'll still try to win this thing at the end. So it probably all comes down to how he kicks off the season at Pipe and Sunset, and to see where his head's at if he's going to plan a big retirement. But I think it'd be a surprise for me if it is next year.
One thing notably absent from last week's announcement was the venue for the 2022 Rip Curl WSL Finals. Now, we're crowning our world champs in our single-day event for the first time this September at Lower Trestles, but the finals has been designed to adopt a bit of a search mentality in that we're going to be going to a different location every year. If it were up to Joe Turpel, and we're just doing this for pageantry because it is actually up to Joe Turpel, where would you take the Rip Curl WSL Finals in 2022?
First off, I'm honored to have this kind of power. And boat trip to the Mentawais, and it moves. It's mobile, and so from the first match to the second match, it's like a surprise. It could be at a left, it could be at a right, and it'll build up to whatever wave is firing. So it's on this boat. The final five will be there hanging out on a boat, and it'll go mobile for each match. Be like, hang on, this wave's on, get ready. So on the fly, they're like, they don't know if they're going left or right.
I like it. That's a very popularist opinion. I think all of our listeners are going to be like, cool, that Joe's decided we're going to Northern Sumatra next September. It'll be great.
Yeah, that's official. Great. Heard it here first.
Let's switch gears a little bit, because Joseph, you are a very, very busy man. You were hidden away in some freezer in Connecticut during the Olympics for NBC. I texted you the day.
Thanks for the message.
The day after it started, and politely asked where the fuck you were. But man, that must have been an incredible experience, and I want to get your readout, which was more than the text you sent me back. But just what was it from your perspective? What was your role, and how did that come to be?
Yeah, it was really first incredible to wake up in Australia and get a call from NBC. And it was 5 a.m. Australia time. I was like, I better stand up for this phone call. This is great. And it was really cool. In my headspace and what I've done before, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going out there calling every heat. And At the time, it was going to be with Kelly, and he was in this awkward spot of maybe being an alternate, for USA. So he was kind of in two minds, and it was really cool to work with Mike Parsons. And it was two of us in this gigantic place in NBC Sports in Connecticut. So we're in Connecticut, and you have this badge, and you check in, and you get on a shuttle. Everything's taken care of. We're on seminars in the lead up for the art of storytelling. And it was really just unbelievable how much information they gave us on, what not to say. Like, for example, in a big call, you're not going to go, oh, and they'll settle for the silver. That's adds disappointment, because this is the greatest moment of someone's career, and I really enjoyed those seminars and the art of storytelling. There's a lot of them in the lead up in the months before the Olympic Games. But then getting into NBC Sports, I got lost 4 or 5 times, I think, on the first day. And the producer was Stevie Lawrence, who we all know, and we've worked in surfing with. So he was a great familiar face. And I had to have suits there and ties. And then it was funny, after the first day, along with your text and my mom, she's like, where are you? And what are you doing? I'm trying to find you. And it was, you're going in there into this room, and I had a play-by-play box, and Snips is next to me in the color. Stevie Lawrence is producing in this other booth, and we're watching these heats. And for some heats, it was going, I don't know if this is going to be prime time, depending on the waves, or, they love the USA stories as well. So sometimes I was just literally calling a wave,
right,
getting out of there, and Snips would call color and get out of there. And we were in the middle, we were on Tokyo time. So we're on the night shift. And I was like, oh, that's how we're getting through an entire event with 2 people, because some heats we took breaks.
Right.
And then, Kolohe, John, Carissa, Caroline, Kanoa, Medina, Italo, and a few more. Just those stories were really heavy, or if the waves were really good or was exciting, we would just start calling it and add insight in more of a paced call.
Right.
And sometimes I think the CT call is more of like a podcast form, especially with our couches these days and people calling in. But now this was more like NBC primetime call,
right,
of short, sweet, get out of there. And I really liked that. It was a lot of fun. It was a cool experience. First day, I was like, I don't know where this is going. And then someone would be like, hey, I saw you on USA Network. And then, and then all of a sudden you'd have a minute heads up. And Stevie's like, CNBC is taking us, 5, 4. And we're just like sitting up, here we go. And we're on. And that feeling was electric. It was really special.
So you guys are basically on hold for the entirety of surfing in the Olympics and getting ready to either call heats or call heats live.
Yeah, and sometimes you're doing highlight recaps.
Right.
We had one on the first day where an executive in Tokyo was like, we want surfing now, and we wanted a highlight. And so all of a sudden we had a highlight reel that was probably a minute, maybe a little more, and they threw to us from Tokyo, and they took us live, and it was basically a highlight of what had happened so far that first day. And then it was boom, that was it.
Yeah.
And then we did more of a package that got sent to different networks. But I realized in that place, they're constantly looking on storylines that might fit that primetime slot. And which was cool, because the gold medal moment was on there, and some things were just used for edit, even social. They could take one wave call that you did and just go, boom, we'll take that and put it somewhere else. And there's these big edit rooms, and it was just an unbelievable machine that was covering, the biggest sporting event in the world.
As a longtime surfing analyst and surfing at the highest levels kind of analyst, what were your performance takeaways from the Olympics? Just from an opinion standpoint.
How easy they made those waves look to surf.
Sure.
Right? I mean, that was gnarly, how hard it was to perform. I mean, we got really lucky with that swell, it was tropical storm, so not quite typhoon status, but it was breaking so far out to sea, and it was chunky and not easy to surf. And it just, sometimes in bad waves, or I should say hard waves to surf, you are even more blown away with what everyone on tour does. Because that day, at Sirigasaki Beach that was not for everyone. Like it was just a day that those surfers could just excel and show how unbelievably talented they are.
I think that's something that we were talking about a lot inside the building too, and people who were not as initiated to surfing were kind of like, well, where did that person go? Like they totally, like they didn't put any scores up, and it was a good education in the sense of it's so easy to get lost in conditions like that. It's not so much a talent thing. It's just like, hey, look, like it's easy to get lost, which, as you pointed out, for the people that don't and people that seem to like bend the ocean to their will in a lot of the ways, is like, it's even more impressive where you're like, how did that person keep doing that? But if you had to kind of take all the variables into your brain and say, okay, not every team was created equal. They didn't all have the same people that went. They had inconsistent resources. Some people had, half a coach on the sideline. Some people had a whole team of them. If you had to take all those things into consideration, which team, nation, men's and women's collectively, do you think performed the best?
Wow, as a whole squad. For some reason, right when you just finished that sentence, I just thought of the Australian team with Bede Durbridge. And, for Steph, that was a shocker to lose that early for her. Sally was expected to medal. And Julian, that's one of those heats that you could talk about forever. Was that the score at the end? So I still felt like he performed at a high level. So even though Owen was the only one that came away with the bronze, their team unity, their high performance centers, the way they were getting looked after for years in the lead up was really, it just took me away, where I was like, hang on, these guys are so prepared. The government's backing them right away. I was really impressed with their whole Australia's organization.
I'm with you on being impressed. Same with Team USA, like all the resources and all the coaches, et cetera. But if you had to measure that against, for me anyway, if you measure the potential they had and the resources they had against the really black and white medal count, I actually think a team like Japan really impressed me, right? Because they didn't have like a full deck in the Olympics. They had the added pressure of having to perform at home. I know some people like home court advantage, but I'd imagine, man, that's a lot psychologically to have to deal with. And they medaled really, really well. I was impressed with them, and obviously impressed with just Idolo and Carissa as well. Yeah,
no, for sure. As being the host nation, what comes with that? And we've learned that Kanoa loves that because of his back-to-back wins in Huntington at the U.S. Open, where he's looking at his people and thriving off them, going, you're going to keep this at home. And he's like, I got you. And we know that about him, where he opened the spot for Zeke. He likes to have that kind of, I'm surfing for this, and they've got my back, I've got yours. And for Amuro, she's been this little sneaky assassin on the tour as a wild card, just getting some rhythm going. And we saw how crazy dangerous she ended up being. So that pretty special. I mean, for them to have a man and a woman to bring home a medal.
I'm going to put you on the spot here as a Hawaii resident. Did Carissa Moore win gold medal for the United States of America or the sovereign surfing nation of Hawaii?
Both. Oh. I'd say in order, Hawaii first, then USA. I think that was really special for her, to represent her Hawaiian heritage where she grew up. Obviously, it's a completely different state in the United States, in the middle of the ocean. It's not connected. And the difference is it has this Hawaiian culture and language and way of life. And surfing was a part of that. Squashed, by the people that came there to say that wasn't right. And they've got to bring back surfing. And they had this ambassador named Duke that shared it with the world. So I think that really touched Carissa's heart to be able to share that Hawaiian story. And I'll also be proud to surf for the USA as well.
Yeah. I mean, I she's such a champion, and that, I'm not a WSL or an ASP apologist, but when I started a long time ago, Rabbit made it abundantly clear that Hawaii is its own sovereign surfing nation. And I'm like, you know what? Post-colonialism be damned. Like, I fucking love this for surfing. And I loved it in 2005 when I started. I love it even more in 2021. So I'd love to see more of it.
I think it just makes sense of where we are today, with what we're talking about. Those uncomfortable stories that we talked about in West Oz that, when we're at Wajamup or Rotten Nest Island, and we're going through the history of those topics that haven't been brought up in years of how uncomfortable those takeovers were. Hawaii went through the same thing, and it's actually more recent, which is wild when you think about it. And so I think we're getting there, and it's okay to mention that. It's actually the right thing to bring up those stories that are hard to talk about, which makes it, I think, even more important to emphasize, the Hawaii, medal for Carissa than USA. I think that's such an important part of the story.
Yeah, for sure. On the topic of big productions, my man, you are the host of this summer's The Ultimate Surfer on ABC. So now you're just collecting checks from all the primetime networks. And you're launching the semi-official after-show podcast. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to call it that, but it doesn't really matter. First off, without spoiling anything, what was your experience being up there and filming for The Ultimate Surfer last summer?
It was really cool. I was happy that you stopped by while we were filming it too, to see your face. That was great. I think it was, for me, I'd never been on a production like that, but it was also done in a time of the world where nothing else was happening. And, I'd been making backyard videos with my daughter and just hanging out in Hawaii. And all of a sudden it was like, are we doing this thing? And we were, and quarantined in, created a bubble. But I was really happy to work with all these top professionals in the business, amazing producers, directors, storytellers. Just the way things worked for me. I had like a schedule handed to me like days in advance of what time someone was going to pick me up at my trailer to bring me to like hair and makeup, to if I was too hot on set, they were bringing me buckets of ice. So I become incredibly high maintenance since then. But it was really fun. Just the resources I had never felt that before. And then also this crazy form of television where all these people really well, and they're put in situations where you're like, ooh, how's this gonna go? But then surfing always had the last say. Surfing was always so important to be like, well, let's see you perform, to keep yourself on this ranch. So it's definitely up there with one of the coolest things I've ever been a part of.
I'm glad you brought up the resources thing, because you're right. I did get to go up there for about 10 days, and that was the big takeaway. It's like, ABC, I get my acronym right here, had actually built like a mini city with all the staff, and it was so impressive, like just the amount of people that were taking care of every little detail to make sure the show was as good as possible. And it made me both appreciate that approach and also appreciate what the WSL broadcast team does, with a fraction of those resources around the world all the time. But it was really, really impressive. On the topic of the podcast, what can listeners expect? What are you guys discussing on the pod?
Yeah, it was really fun hanging out with Cassie Randolph, and she's obviously from The Bachelor, won that season, which is great. And she's so cool and mellow, but has really cool reality TV insight of being on an ABC show on, primetime television, and how her profile changed and what it's like to have mics on you and cameras on you. Our surfers were definitely not used to. And yeah, it was really cool just to kind of relive it again and see the product that, they all came up with at Pilgrim Studios and ABC. You're so inside of it when you're working there.
Right, yeah.
And then when you see the episodes roll out, you're like, wow, this is really cool. And you relive the challenges of the writers that they came up with to make the surfers uncomfortable and to throw them off. And it was all genius. So it was really fun reliving it on those kind of post shows. We get to talk to the surfers that get knocked off early and go through that emotional roller coaster and talk about the major highlights as well. The podcast show was a lot of fun.
Right on. Well, we will all look forward to listening to that as a complimentary piece of media when the show launches. We're going to take a quick break to get a word in from our sponsors, and when we come back, we will wind the clock back and find out where Joe Turpel came from. Now, I don't know if it's similar for you, but I often get asked the question of like, well, how'd you get a job in surfing broadly, whether it's the WSL or something else? And obviously everyone has a different path, but I'm sure someone like you gets asked this quite a lot, being so forward-facing in the surfing world. But maybe we start at the beginning. So where did Joe Turpel come from? Where were you born, raised? What was your family like?
It's a pretty good question. Sometimes when someone in passing says, where am I from? I don't really know what to say. I moved around so much growing up. But I was born in a place called San Dimas. Did you ever see Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure?
Sure did.
I can't tell you anything about San Dimas, but I know I was born there. And I think my parents knew the nurses or doctors there, and a lot of my cousins were born there because of that. So was born there, and then I lived in a place called Diamond Bar, a place called Phillips Ranch. That's in Pomona, California. pretty far from the beach. And I guess the idea of that location was my mom was teaching at San Clemente High School at the time. My dad was working at Universal Studios at the time, and it was a brand new neighborhood. So they're like, we'll buy this house. That'll be great. A bunch of kids are living here. And we're in the middle of where we both have to work. They always joke later. They're like, we realized we gave each other both a commute. Like we could have just given one person a commute.
Sure, yeah.
Then we're both driving like all this time and trying to get home as fast as we can. So we randomly lived there until my dad went on strike at his job. It was on the news. He was a stuntman on the A-Team live action show, and he was fighting for better wages for the stuntman. And he was the only one with kids. And basically, long story short, they won one of those battles. They lowered the wages again. And then they were like, you know what? We're not doing the A-Team anymore. We're doing Miami Vice. So you guys are done, you know? And all of a sudden he's like, I'm out of work. And so he grew up in Hawaii because my grandfather was a commander in the Navy. So he got stationed there. And then my dad went to middle school and high school and was a lifeguard. And that's where he fell in love with surfing. So this created an opportunity to bring his family to Hawaii and just have a new chapter. And so then we moved there. My oldest sister, Gina, you know really well.
Yep.
We're like, all right, we're going to Hawaii. That sounds great.
How old are you at this point?
I am 6 turning 7.
Now, did you get to watch the A-Team when your dad was in it?
I did.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. So I was little. Obviously, I was like 5, and we'd sit in this audience, and he shot an M16 and did the slide for life, which was off this tower shooting the bad guys. He let go of this cable from like 100 feet in the air and land on the top of a moving truck. But he also hosted the show. So he'd be like, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, this is the A-Team live action show. I'm Joe Turpel. We have the same name. And then he would turn into character like Murdoch or Face.
Right.
And it was really fun to watch him when I was really little. And there was one moment my grandma was in town, his mom, and he'd always be like, Mom, you know, try not to say anything. You know, it's like your mom's there. And he fell off and he actually hurt himself. He had like blood on his hand in one of the scenes. And it was all like intense vibe. And my grandma goes, oh, my baby. You know, he's like, he could hear loud and clear. He's like, oh my God, that's my mom. You know? But yeah, it was cool seeing him in that sort of setting because his career changed pretty drastically after that. So
yeah, so you guys go to Hawaii, and is that where you start surfing?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was where my sister Gina and I started going to Waikiki with my dad, and he would bribe us sometimes because we had a lot of fun outside. We had a big yard, and I'd be playing like baseball, sandlot style with my friends, and he'd be like, let's go to the beach. I'm like, not yet, Dad. I'm in the middle of this. You know, it's the bottom of the 9th. I need this. And then he's like, I'll give you $quarter for every wave you catch. For some reason, that just blew my mind.
That's a lot of money for a 6-year-old.
I got to go.
Yeah.
I've got some money to make. You know? And we'd go to Waikiki, and he'd honestly count our waves and give us quarters at the end. And we were doing a lot of boogie boarding at the time. And then he had a 7/8 single fin. I don't ever remember him waxing it. And he would just shove us into waves. And we would ride them forever.
Yeah, right.
And it was the funnest thing ever. I never wanted to leave. And those beginnings were so pure because my dad, you know, he's funny. He just wasn't reading magazines. He wasn't following a contest circuit. His favorite surfer was, you know, now the late Greg Knoll because that was the name on his board and he loved his surfboard. So he wasn't talking about events or industry or anything. Right. It was our days at the beach wasn't about form or technique. It was about the ride. So it was, I feel like surfing in its purest form in a lot of ways.
It's interesting you say that because I think everyone kind of has similar experiences, especially in those really formative ones where even if there's sort of a vague, indirect awareness of an industry or like, big wave surfing or competitive surfing, everything is, all your senses are so jacked up when you first start surfing, like the smell of the wax and like the banana boat sunscreen. And like, you're right. Like where it's like, it's the first thing in my life that I remember being entirely enveloped by, where it's like, okay, I'm not thinking about literally one other thing because I'm trying to survive on this piece of fiberglass, you know?
Yeah. And just the feeling you get from it. It was not about where you went on it. And I remember my dad's review, and I was like, how was that drop? Whoa, that wave was crazy. It wasn't about like, bend your knees a little more or anything like that. It was just, how was that ride? That was amazing. You're going so fast, you know?
And how long did you guys live in Hawaii for?
So then we left when I was 13. So I went right into 8th grade at Niguel Hills Middle School. That's in Laguna Niguel.
Yep.
And I've never gone to 7th grade before. I did 4th twice though. That's kind of random. But at the school I went to in Hawaii.
Did you do better the second time?
Yeah. You had to be older. So I went to Puno, and then you had to be older than I was. Just where my birthday lies.
Yeah.
I had to go to 4th again. That was not a fun feeling as a 4th grader, but it was a really redemption kind of moment when I skipped 7th grade.
All right.
And got, when we moved back to California.
All right.
Yeah.
And so did you struggle with the move back? Because I'd imagine culturally it's a shift.
It fully was. I was playing baseball a lot, growing up in Hawaii, and I was like pitching for the high school team in warm-ups. That was sort of felt like my track at the time.
Right.
And when I moved to California, I got really out of shape, and I just
why though? Why is that?
Well, we had a stint at my grandparents' house who lived by Knott's Berry Farm, and my mom's side, they're from New Orleans, and boy, my grandma could cook. You name it, gumbo and everything like that. It was so good. When we lived in Hawaii, Gina and I would just kind of eat whatever and just ate pretty light. We were active,
lot of
running a lot, and we couldn't put a pound on us. Then we had this like 6-month period where we weren't playing sports, and grandma was feeding us, and I gained a lot of weight really fast, and it was crazy. I remember.
It's a good vibe to enter 8th grade with.
Oh yeah,
those kids are really understanding.
Oh gosh, it was wild, man. Being in the locker room and you're the new kid, you're from Hawaii, you kind of like sound a little different, you act a little different, you're wearing different clothes, and my eye opener was when I was running the mile in Hawaii in PE. I was like just breaking 7 minutes, nothing too crazy. And then we ran the mile, and I was like, sweet. I was so clueless. I had no idea how out of shape I was as an 8th grader. You're pretty young. And I ran the mile, and I was like, oh, I wonder if I beat my time. I had no idea. Yeah. They're like 9:45. I was like, oh my God, I'm slow. I'm actually out of shape, and I got to figure this out.
So what was your pathway? I mean, you're a very fit guy, Joe. I have a hard time imagining this, but I can empathize.
Right.
What was your pathway through high school? Because just knowing you personally, and knowing our trajectories were somewhat parallel in a lot of ways, Orange County to Santa Barbara, et cetera, are same age. How did surfing really take a hold on you in a different way once you were in Orange County?
Completely. I think it defined a shift in my life more than I realized. It was always something I shared with my family, and we loved it. But then moving into this backyard of this surf industry in Orange County, people had magazines in their textbooks. They were drawing waves on their backpacks. And they're like, oh, you're from Hawaii, you surf? I'm like, yeah, sure. Of course.
Stickers are their own form of currency. And
I was like, wow, this industry, though, I just didn't know about. I didn't know the Pipe Masters was running every winter when I lived there. We were not driving out there to see it. And I felt like I was in this small little world, which is really precious to me now. But I, all of a sudden, was playing baseball, and I was slower, and it wasn't the same feeling. And I was like, I think I'm going to quit. And the ocean just was like a really beautiful place. I was just begging for rides to get down to anywhere I could, from Sano to Doheny to Salt Creek. And I rode longboards and was just riding anything. I just was begging for rides to the ocean. And all of a sudden, I think that move, that's when I felt surfing defined me. Where I was like, this is what I do. Whereas in Hawaii, it was like, yeah, we all do this because we all hang at the beach all day, but it became like my path, and I didn't know anyone. I was a new kid. I didn't have friends, and it was really a spot where I could just be in the ocean and surf.
Was that when you were in Orange County and you started surfing, getting into it, and there was a heightened awareness of the industry, right? Because we're in Velcro Valley. Is that where you started kind of identifying like, oh, there's like a tour and there's this thing called professional surfing? And for you personally, was there any kind of like dream board of like, yep, I'm going to do this and I'm going to be on the QS and then, world title in 5 years?
Yeah, the world title never got there, but I definitely just inhaled every magazine I could find. My friends were just baffled. I could name everyone's sponsor. They just asked me, and I'd tell them every sticker on that person's board. I just inhaling magazines.
Super important information, because I'm the same where it's like, What do you mean? You didn't know that person switched to Billabong?
Yeah,
Like,
that was a big deal.
What are you paying attention to in your life?
Yeah. Look, read right here, you
Yeah,
guys. Like, they're flipping through that. Cool. And I was just studying it in a different way.
Yeah.
I'd even write articles. No one was making me do it on like the difference between shortboarding and longboarding because I was doing a lot of different stuff back then. And I just was absorbing everything I could, which was interesting. For me as goals in surfing, I think just playing baseball in a sport and doing that and loving it, I was like, I surf now. So yeah, I want to do contests. I need to do that. And then I want a sticker on my board. I remember like wanting a sticker on my board, and I wanted to work at a surf shop, and I worked at Infinity. And so I was like doing it all that way. And I realized I surfed some of those heats back then. I had no idea. I was so unprepared. I had no idea what I was doing, but I just wanted to feel it. And I was like, well, I want to play the game, right? I love surfing now. I want to play. And I had no idea what I was getting into.
It is funny. I've told this story on the podcast before, but like similarly where same deal where I'm like, oh, this sounds like a great ticket out of suburbia. Like, and just to even sort of psychologically exposing yourself to like somewhere that's not America, and like, it's like, cool, that interests me, Same thing where it's like flubbing your way through heats, whether it's in high school or college, which is what I did. And then I remember like viscerally starting to work at the ASP and going to Hawaii and watching people surf, being like, I don't know how to surf. Like whatever I was doing before, like whatever effectiveness it had, whatever efficacy was going on is not real. Like that's a different thing. I have to go strip everything back to bare bones and relearn what I'm doing.
It's so true. And it was like when I got to the point where I started announcing NSSAs,
right?
And this is like the Grom level where I was just like, oh goodness gracious, like these guys could beat us in the college series and they're 12,
right.
So there was so much, it was just so amazing to have your mind blown away in the surfing life and how you get into it on such a small scale, just being something you do with your family, to be like, oh my gosh, there is a level shift in such a big way, the closer you get to the world tour.
Last week I spoke with Lisa Anderson, and we wove our way into this topic that I really enjoyed, and she gave a great answer, and I was wondering about it in advance of our conversation today. But do you consider yourself to be more of an introvert or more of an extrovert?
That's a really good question. I think I honestly fit both places really well. If I work a big event for a while and I put all my energy into it, I'm like mentally drained. Like I'm not going to dinner trying to hold court,
Right,
and I'm fairly quiet sometimes in certain crowds. I think so. I really relate with that introverted feeling in certain social groups, and then sometimes you can't get me to shut up. And I think some friends from college just think I'm the funny guy. So like in that crowd, I can't stop joking around because it's almost like they're ready for me to use that part of my life, and my personality will expand in that way. So I honestly see myself in both quite often, of turning this live presence on and off all the time. I've had to learn how to do that. And then just hanging with your friends where you're loose and just enjoying it. It's funny. I could hear my family just like arguing with me right now. And you're like, you're an extrovert, but
Right, yeah.
I honestly feel moments where I love my personal time alone and being quiet. And there's sometimes I'll see a lot of energy in a certain place and I'll like go the other way,
Right.
where I'm attracted to silence.
You mentioned, writing articles when you were younger. I'm wondering if there was anything else where you noticed early on that you were comfortable being extroverted around people, even if you weren't sort of naturally an extrovert. Did you do drama class or plays? Were you in bands? Was anything like that early on for you kind of identified like, oh, this is something I enjoy?
I did this weird thing in high school. I would just tell jokes out of nowhere in the class. So there'd be a quiet moment and I'd tell a joke. And when I got the class to crack up and laugh, it was really rewarding. And they'd be silly dad jokes well beyond my dadhood. It was crazy. I felt this energy. I ran cross country a bit in high school because I was trying to trim down from grandma's house. But we'd be on a bus and I would just go on this random little joke spiel and try to make everybody laugh on the bus, until we got to the race. And those were moments where I started feeling like, oh, I love making people laugh. That was really fun. And I think those were kind of early moments where I would kind of get something off of like speaking in front of a crowd. In 5th grade at Punahou, my teacher, Miss Feck, would kick me out of class quite a bit. I'd go to the office, and it was like just like saying so I thought was funny, like at the wrong time. And she'd be like, back to the office. We were actually neighbors on the school, so we were good friends. But I think she almost was playing into the moment, to make the class laugh harder that I was getting in trouble again. So those were kind of like funny little moments that I was kind of realizing I was comfortable in that place. But still that I had a long way to go to learn how to settle nerves and all that other stuff.
When was the first surf event that you commentated, and how did that come to be? Because I'm sure most of the people listening to this podcast are like, yeah, how'd that happen? How do I get into it?
Yeah, so we were on the Snowy Plovers. I don't know if we described that completely, but that
we should break.
Okay,
So background, intermission time, story time. Joe and I didn't know each other in college, but we were on the same surf team, and the surf team had multiple levels, A, B, C, D, and then below D, maybe some more letters, was the Snowy Plover group for people that were not on the A team material. So Joe and I existed on this same division, although we just didn't know each other, right? And then, as you said, I ended up meeting your sister Gina because she worked at Billabong when I was working at the ASP. And then she introduced me to you because you were commentating some Billabong events. And then as we started talking, we're like, oh, we went to school at the same time. And like, oh, we were on the same surf team. All right. So it's just sort of Slack friends.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, that was cool. I remember seeing you in Maui, and I was like, I know that guy. It was, for the women's event.
We've been in the same house at some
I
point.
was like, hang on. And I was like, did you go to UCSB? And you're like, yeah. And it was just, I remember seeing you at like Campus Point in the water, and I just never completely met. So from competing on those teams, you'd have a beach announcer, early webcasts were happening. And so I was, figuring out your job after you graduate. And I asked Janice Aragon and Gayleen Clifford from the NSSA, I was going, hey, do you guys need anybody to announce these events on the beach? And because I was down at Salt Creek supporting like the next UCSB surf team, just watching. And they're like, you know what? We might, but Nationals is coming up for like the big show. We don't really know what's coming out of your mouth yet. And I was like, oh, of course. So come back next year in September and we'll give you a shot. And I just sort of walked away and was like, cool, we'll see how that goes. And Gayleen emailed me like a month out and was like, okay, our first event is coming up in September at Brookhurst Street. And are you available? And I was like, whoa, they remembered. And yeah, I'll be there. And that was the very first one I did. The waves were pumping. It was like as good as Huntington gets.
Right, yeah.
Like a crossed up swell, peaks everywhere, little overhead, glassy. Everyone's getting spit out of barrels. And it was the first time as a surfer where I woke up that early and I wasn't going surfing. And I remember how trippy that was because I was going, oh my God, it's so fun. Like my favorite kind of waves. And, but it made it really cool because then I've learned the better the waves are, makes everyone's job better at a contest. And it was so fun. And I couldn't believe the level of everyone, young Kolohe, young Andrew Doheny, a young Nat Young. Like it was just, I was blown away. Courtney Conlog, Sage. It was really fun to see all them as little kids just getting barreled out of their minds.
So you've graduated college. What are you doing for work at this point, right? Because commentating NSSA events probably isn't paying the rent.
Not at all. Yeah, I was broke, and
I say all that because I was broke too. This is not a me versus you, but we were both broke.
Nothing to show for myself. My sister, as you know, is such a hero of mine and was so driven and got straight A's and awesome. And she started this magazine called Salt Magazine at the time, and she came from water, helped start Foam Magazine, then did her own thing. And I feel like my parents kind of made her hire me, but
we're worried about your brother.
Yeah. So she was like, oh, yeah, she loves me so much. She was like, yeah, 2 days a week you're on. And still I was trying to I was always broke. And it was such a great experience having her as my boss. It's like best thing ever. And then I started, picking up work on the sidelines. From there, I actually tried to start sales repping. You remember Utopia Optics at all?
Yeah, totally.
They had Jamie O'Brien.
JOB, big boxy frames.
Taylor Knox at the time. They paid me like $1,500 a month to stay on the road, which as a rep is kind of a big deal. That was like a base. And I immediately blew that on a truck. I was, I need a truck now.
Yeah, I'm a rep.
Yeah,
That's
I'm repping.
part of the uniform.
I need AC that works.
Yeah.
My other truck didn't have
Yeah.
that. So I picked up glass apparel and films. It was like a small startup company. It was like t-shirts. So I was trying to like get all my little repping things going. And I think Utopia was kind of in their last hurrah at the time. So I just really lived their last little pump at trying to make this happen for a few months. And then that was squashed. And my buddy Garrett Turk, who's now at Super 73, we went to high school together, and he was always so cool. He's like, hey, come help us load the truck at Ocean Minded Sandals. So he was working there at the time. So I'd work in the warehouse packing boxes and then call NSSAs on the weekends. And that was a lot of fun. The warehouse banter was amazing and some good guys in there. And short-lived after that was when I started working at Blackline. And Garrett again introduced me to Drew Todd, who made 5.5, 19 and a quarter. And all of a sudden we had this rad traction company that Drew started that I was helping with, and it was flying off the rack, and I was building more events at the time. And that started blending into like first CT events for me as well.
It's I don't want to speak for you, but just to go back to the question for a lot of people that are like, well, how do you end up doing what you do in the surfing world? And I always tell people that from my own personal experience, it's like, well, just be willing to, if you're passionate about something, be willing to don't what's the word? Don't let people take advantage of you. But at the same time, like, be willing to work for nothing. Like, if you're passionate about it, because at some point people will recognize that if you're good, and they'll start paying you for it, and similarly, like working at the surf shop, taking internships, et cetera. And it sounds like it's similar for you because you were just taking opportunities in places that you're passionate about.
And I turned down jobs that wouldn't let me commentate.
Right.
So as I was getting to know people, and, it was really cool. I got an opportunity to interview at Surfing Magazine for associate editor. And I was like, my question was always, oh, but can I still commentate? And when that was a no, I'd say, oh, thanks anyway. And some of my friends are going, dude, you finally have a job. You could afford stuff. And I was like, but then I can't commentate anymore. And anytime one of those opportunities came up, I had a few of them, and I just kept going, no. And it wasn't like I lost sleep over it.
Right.
I just knew I didn't want to stop commentating.
Coming from Southern California, there were kind of, you can heat check me on this, but I remember two very bright lights in terms of the commentary, right? One was Dave Stanfield, and the other is, unfortunately, the late Rock and Fig. Were those your guys that you looked for as reference points?
It was so cool walking up the tower at Nationals, NSSA Nationals at Lowers for the first time. It was like so high up, and seeing Rock and Fig, and his voice was so familiar from Surf Reports on K-Rock. And oh gosh, we had so many good laughs up in that tower, and his performance and his charisma and his jokes, and he'd bring his CD player with all these songs. He'd be DJing the whole thing with this classic, amazing book full of CDs. And he was just awesome to hang with and vibe off of. And then I miss him already, man. I called him a week before he passed, just randomly. I had this feeling. It was weird. And I'm so thankful that I got to hear his voice again. But yeah, he was definitely an awesome person to hang with in those early years. And he was always so proud of me too, which was great. I felt sometimes you don't know if you get support from people that do the same thing. And he was definitely someone who like had my back. And Dave Stanfield I was always so impressed by how prepared he was with content. He'd give you a story that you're like, I didn't know that. And I was like, his organization of these little Rolodex things he has was really eye-opening for me. And my first event I called, he was supposed to call it, first webcast, 2007 women's event in Brazil. Sometimes the surf industry back then, like you wouldn't know if you were going to do a job until the week before.
Yeah, back then.
Not like now. It's changed a lot.
Yeah, a ton.
So because of that, kind of, he didn't know if he was on, and, being a professional that he is, he's like, well, I've got more opportunities here. I got to accept this other work. So he was calling a dog show on the East Coast. Then they called him, and then he couldn't do it because he had committed. So that's where my kind of opening came in to call this event in Brazil. And all of a sudden I just got nervous. I got like a migraine. I don't get migraines. Like I was panicking. And I just reached out to him and I said, hey man, I'm going to Bahia. Would love to just chat and any advice. And he made time for me while he was in the airport on the East Coast in transit and just gave me a little rundown for about 4 minutes. And I thought that was really cool.
Did he give you any like insights from the Best in Show? Was he like, oh, the schnauzer really surprised everybody?
Yeah. I was just like, wow, I don't know if I could call a dog show. It just shows your depth of broadcasting if you can get thrown into anything, you know? Some guys can call anything.
You know, and we both are, as I said, you know, we're the same age and we've kind of seen, it's all relative, right? But when we started, very Wild West. Surf industry, sport of surfing, etc. Before us, considerably more Wild West, but now not as Wild West. But for you, did you have a vision of what that profession was going to be when you started? Did you have in your mind where you're like, yeah, I could, at some point, I can do the whole tour and I can be this person? Or was it just something you were kind of testing the waters about?
I was very present with getting a gig, getting one job. I was very present. And if I didn't get a job, I was fine with it, actually. Right. I was just like, sweet. I won't feel that pressure, right? You know, I could watch. But it was, the idea of getting one event was is really fulfilling because I was still trying to realize what my craft was before even perfecting my craft. And so I wasn't ever getting too far ahead of like where this would go or what it would mean, or I could afford things or have a family one day. Right, I was actually very event to event in that way, where getting like, you know, Brazil as a CT, getting J-Bay, that was monumental for me at the time. You know, one, I hadn't traveled much growing up and I was going to these places I dreamed about, but also I got another chance to do this thing. And I had this weird feeling like I felt I could. I just felt I could do it. And I was just following that feeling I had. It's so interesting. And I think this is probably part of the story that, I mean, a lot of people just weren't exposed to. But, you know, before the acquisition, the event licensees would run their own broadcasts, right? So you'd have your Hurleys and your Billabongs, your Quicksilvers. So if you were a fan of professional surfing in, you know, 2012 and before, and you wanted to watch 10 CT events, you'd go to 10 different websites with 10 different production teams and 10 different commentary teams. And it was something where even before that, we're like, hey, it might not be the worst idea to have some sort of consistency, even before the acquisition. And I remember having a very direct conversation with our CEO at the time, Brody Carr, and he had come from a board meeting and they said, yep, they really want to take this on. They want to have consistent commentary because what they would do previously is they would take, you know, ex-team writers or team managers or marketing people and put them into the broadcast, many of whom ended up becoming commentators across the season. But, you know, a lot of it wasn't ideal, you know. And I remember him asking me, and I said, well, the thing I liked about these people, blah, 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 but the thing I like about Joe is it's never about him. You know, because some of the commentators back at those days would love, it was another showcase for them, right, in the sense. And it's like, I love Joe because it's not about him, it's about what's happening in the water. And he just has this great humility to him. And man, I think you've really taken that and like driven that into a very, very crystallized role through all that. On the topic of roles, though, there's different ones inside the commentary. For our listeners, can you kind of break down the different ones and maybe land on the one that you occupy more often than not? For sure. First off, that means a lot, Dave. Thank you so much for the support all the years, and I love it. Yeah, there's a lot of different roles. For me, I'm a play-by-play guy, so I'm kind of telling you what happens. My first instinct is, you know, call what's in the water first and then fill in the gaps with stories. I'm always trying to bring the best out of whoever I'm sitting next with. And that's a color commentator. So oftentimes an ex-pro surfer that has insight to tell the viewers why, you know, something happens or what was important in a wave. So that's like a booth team, play-by-play, color. And these days, oftentimes you're paired with that person. Like for me with Potts, I called 6 years together and you're just paired with that person. You connect as friends and develop a really good rapport. You also have sideline reporters that are picking up sort of insight from coaches, things they notice from the ground level that we might not see from the booth, and also get those interviews from the athletes when they come in from the water. And then you also get the ocean report now for condition updates, insight from another dimension of actually being in the water with the surfers. So as far as our team goes, you kind of have a sideline reporter that's picking up maybe stories. You have another one that's maybe focused on interviews on that shift. And with water insight as well, that adds that, it just brings you to this huge playing field of what a surf contest is. And then for the booth, it's just like moment to moment of what's happening from when the horn starts till it finishes.
Do you ever get like grass is greener syndrome with the other role players on the team where you're like, man, I'd like to do some color, or I'd like to do some of this? Like what goes on there?
Well, I think with play-by-play, as I feel like growing with that role is sometimes getting better at color can make me a better play-by-play guy. So if I think of something that would be helpful to analyze, I can lead by questioning. If it's my idea, I can sort of hand it over as a softball if they love it or don't, and I think that explaining why, you can kind of play it a little bit more by leading your color commentator, by like that analysis side that you pick up by watching so many heats. There's definitely sometimes where you're like, how cool to be in the water right now. I mean, especially when you see our water, sometimes Strider, sometimes Pete, when they're getting waves on the side, you're going, I'm so jealous. They're surfing right now, by the way, they're getting waves. It's not fair. So I get jealous of that. And just being outside is fun too. I think every role is really cool. And so I think we're all seeing that, it's fun to rotate around. And on Maui, sometimes when we've got a smaller team, I'll get to do a sideline interview, and I get a kick out of that. It's really fun.
I was going to ask, do you feel like you've specialized so much in the play-by-play that that's probably your trajectory moving forward, or do you think you could maybe become more of a generalist and play different roles moving forward?
I mean, I feel I have a lot of fun doing it all,
yeah.
But I think it's probably just the most reasonable fit, and especially since I was never on tour and everything, it's fun having like a pro specialist in that color role to tell why. Kind of like, Joe Buck, Troy Aikman sort of thing in football. It's fun to have someone with so much experience that you can play off of. But in a surf contest, they're so long. Just, round one, 8 hours of broadcast. It's crazy that you actually have so much time to sort of get out of your lane a little bit,
Couple more topics, and we definitely have some listener questions, but we're going to take one more quick break to get a word in from our sponsors, and we'll be back soon. So we are recording this episode in August 2021, and the world, this is an understatement, has been through a lot in the last couple of years, and maybe a lot in the most collective manner it has in decades, although you and I are from Orange County, so I think we probably each know people who are violently avoiding being part of that collective, but that's a topic for another day. I don't think the world will ever go back to what it was before the pandemic, and I don't think it should. But narrowing in on a sports perspective, it feels like the conversations we're having, and maybe it's a result of having the time to think about it because of the pandemic, but we're seeing athletes apply their agency in more public ways around topics like mental health, from Naomi Osaka to Noah Lyles and Simone Biles. So this last discussion topic I wanted to pick your brain on, which is exciting because I don't know where we're going to end up, and this isn't a fully formed thought of mine either, but you and I reside inside of sports. Now, we might reside inside a sport that's in the tiny corner of the great map of sports, but, there are sort of common threads across a lot of things. And I wanted to get your thoughts on the 2020 version of professional sports from the surfing perspective. Do you think professional sports these days are good, bad, ugly? Can they be salvaged? What's your take on the whole conversation around professional sports at the moment?
I like this topic. Yeah, it's broad, but there's so many things that you can take away. I think what has impacted us, or me, you, maybe the most in our sport of surfing, but even in the broad sense that it's okay to share what you believe in or what you might do your sport for, a bigger purpose, and whether it's a story of racial issues or standing up for people or, speaking on mental health that might not have been popular before. It's almost like that quiet place or those elephants in the room that people are like, can we talk about this? It's kind of like, you can. And now that when everyone was stuck at home and sports were down, the only way we heard from people was from their social media networks. And I think it allowed people to say like, well, people got to get to know me off the court or out of the water. And, we realized it wasn't for everybody. And it kind of made people feel uncomfortable. I think I heard a lot of people say, I just want to have my sports and that's my time to relax. And I really enjoyed having that extra part of knowing who someone was. And when it was for a cause that was beautiful and about humanity and love, you're like, what a great place to do it, you know? So sports started being this vehicle of maybe trying to solve issues in the world that, you know, are still out there that need help with. So that was the biggest thing that I noticed in the last couple of years as being this huge change in the way you're watching sports, because even with commentators or halftime shows, it was okay to bring up topics that make people uncomfortable and teach you how to begin those conversations and make it okay to have a back and forth, to be educated. So it's crazy when sports take you there. It's more than the adrenaline of having a athlete succeed in what they do and having the miracle of the greatest perform at what they do. It's now that performance is backed by, you know, this driving cause, like for a Tyler Wright, or how open she's been. You know, it's like when she surfs the heat now, it's different for me. Like there's much more to her story than a few years back.
Yeah, I'm with you. I feel like the information age, for as much trauma as this probably calls, you know, humanity in a lot of ways, is actually the positive is this sort of really challenged longstanding paradigms, whether it's sort of capitalism or the patriarchy or whatever it is, because I feel like the sporting industrial complex, and you can probably apply this to the entertainment industry or like anywhere, right, is it has this obsession with the cult of youth. They love to get people in there early on. They love to create archetypes. They love to say, yep, stay on this road and this is proven to make money. You know, this makes money, print or go burr in a lot of ways. And now we're caught in this space where, you know, high profile people, whether they're athletes or entertainers, are like, well, this is who I am, you know, whether it's something around my race or my sexuality or my upbringing. I'm not going to hide that if it doesn't fit into the archetype, because there's no daylight between who I am and who I present myself as. So in that way, I think it's really, really positive. I wonder, though, that if the conversation continues to happen, it continues to go upstream and it really starts to dismantle, and in my opinion, personal opinion, of course, things in a really positive way. Because, I mean, I think we've probably seen it more often than not in surfing, where it's like, you know, paying 12-year-olds is not maybe the best thing. And you talk to the brands and they're like, we don't want to do it either. But there's this weird collective momentum where it's like, well, if we take a stand and the other brands don't take a stand, we don't get that 12-year-old. And it's like, but that's not good for anybody, the 12-year-old included.
It's so true. I mean, there's so many stories of burnout factor or the money that the kid's making is actually maybe too important for the family in that way, where a kid's taking a role that they maybe shouldn't have yet, you know?
Right,
And then it's like, it's hard to dive into someone's family story because maybe that's saving them, you know? So it's just hard to navigate it. And I don't think a lot of sports can understand what surfers go through, because a lot of youth athletes aren't getting these huge contracts and being hyped up and put in magazines and put, you know, expectations on them in the same way. It's really interesting how surfing is that place where, you know, a 12-year-old can make more money than anyone in their household, and all of a sudden that comes with pressure that maybe they don't know how to deal with.
For sure. And I mean, as sort of a tourist in other sports and other disciplines, like, it doesn't seem like it's wholly unique to surfing, right? Like, you see this happen in the entertainment world, you see this happen in other sports, and yeah, I don't know, even for the champions and the superstars that we lionize that kind of make it at the other end, where they're like, they won their world titles or they got to middle age or whatever, like, I still don't know if that's the healthiest route for them in a lot of ways. And when you talk to them, they're like, yeah, no, I wish I hadn't had to do these things. But it's weird. I don't think there's a good answer on what to do moving forward, right? Because I was having this conversation with Stephen Bell up at Surf Ranch, and we were talking about, he goes, you know, no one in Europe, no one's paying for Quicksilver to develop the talents of Mikey Wright, Leonardo Fioravanti, and Kanoa Igarashi the same way they were when he identified them as sort of young people, like early teens, maybe preteens. And they're paying them all this money and they're sending them to Indonesia. And he's like, we're not going to have the same talent in 10 years because we're not developing those kids the same way. And I said, no, but I actually think maybe that's a good thing, because I don't know if we should be sending 12-year-olds to Indonesia and forfeiting, a semblance of a regular life, I suppose.
It's so interesting because how many different ways to greatness are there, even on the tour? Of a Steph starting at 11 or 12, which feels like Lakey in the same boat. A Reynolds is in that boat, and then
Right.
you have the people that are born in a Jersey. Like from Kolohe to a Coco, where it was
Totally.
kind of always going to happen.
Yeah.
And Kelly, who went to high school, and he didn't do a homeschool. He actually went to high school, and at 18, it was like you turn pro at 18 and look who he is. It's hard to compare anything to him, but there's all these avenues to greatness where people who never went to school, they're phenoms who homeschool early, they're good. Some people don't get through that and end up having issues, putting so many eggs in that basket of like, you have to be a pro now. Now you're homeschooled. This is your job. You're 11,
Yeah.
and
That's
I,
right.
I could see problems with that. And some kids can handle it. So it's hard to like identify, don't do this or don't do that.
What's
or this
best
is
for
your path.
everybody. Yeah,
'Cause I
exactly,
feel
yeah.
like even an individual that's getting paid at 10, they can thrive in that. They with good parenting and good people around them, they can find a lot of success and not have mental issues that come with it, and I think there's always been that analysis on the Johns, the Kolohes, of like, will there be a burnout factor? Because there's stories that did. They've obviously proven that wrong, but their life was a lot different than most kids growing up who just enjoyed surfing and liked it.
I wonder if surfing out of almost any sport has the potential to kind of course correct this, as odd as that sounds, right? Because surfing like prides itself on being progressive nonconformist, although I have a lot of opinions on that. But that's the idea where it's like, well, society isn't always right. Like, we're surfers. Education and the government, everything. It's like, and it's like, yeah, I get it. But like, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, knowledge is good, even if you don't agree with the educational system. But you mentioned someone like Dane Reynolds, who obviously made a huge impact on the surfing world, started relatively late compared to all the sort of candidates who were born in Jersey. And I do think the ocean and surfing in general does provide space for someone like that, where it's like, you can have somewhat of a normal upbringing. You can go to school. Please go to school. Like, you can graduate high school and you can still be considered the best surfer in the world at some point.
Yeah, and I think that we're always balancing that storyline on tour, from a Sean Holmes wild card story just coming back, like people like who are basically bartending on the sidelines and then win a QS. We've got a bartender on the Ultimate Surfer. There's always that story of like, well, I got here this way and you got here this way, and it both created greatness on certain levels. So I think surfing is kind of broken down in that way, being that counterculture. However, there's that straight line of success to be a world champion, and some people get there all sorts of ways to finally get there. And I think we're always trying to define it. Maybe the best thing would actually, there's an area to create that coaching or education process of kids who are getting sponsored early, and kind of give them examples of what to expect, what things you can avoid, what has happened in the past, and kind of teach on, hey, can be a scary place, having this kind of success so early. This is what you could be aware of. On the other side of education is also people when they fall off tour or retire, on helping your mental health recover from the spotlight of being, you're the best in the world, and then you're at home and there's some quietness about you, and you're trying to understand why you're great still as a human being, and being satisfied with who you are, and your character and your integrity should always be first. I think we're seeing that, being promoted in the Olympics with Simone Biles, kind of doing what was unthinkable and walking away from a moment to medal and saying, I'm not even competing. My mental state's better. And that's a huge place, because all of a sudden now you're like, wait, who you are is more important than this win. How many times you heard someone, they finally win and they're like, oh, wait, that's it? Like, what happens now? And
Yeah.
I think what needs to be nurtured for kids and for pros, doesn't matter the age, is that help from the ups and downs of pressure to succeed. And when you don't, what that means in balancing that crazy mental exercise of loving who you are, no matter what the result says, or if you're on tour or not.
It's interesting because this starts to make me think about the conversation around celebrity just in society, and also with surfing, where someone had brought this up to me. They said, yeah, Kelly Slater is like very, very, very famous, but he can still like walk down the beach and go surfing, you know, and you can paddle out and sit next to him. I'm sure he would appreciate it. But like, it's a little bit like, you know, if you're galaxy braining this, it's like, I want to be famous to get paid enough to be comfortable, but not so famous that I can't walk down the street or that I need to employ a security team. And I think that surfing can kind of hit that sweet spot for people, right? Where it's like, you don't have to be like Kanye West level of untouchable, but you can be world famous, but you can also just kind of, if we can support everyone correctly, it's like, well, you can have a normal life and hopefully a healthy life.
Yeah. I think surfers kind of feel that probably, where maybe not every airport someone's saying hi, but if they're passing through a decent surf spot, people are going to probably be like, whoa, hey, what's going on? You want a coffee? And it's sort of just the right amount, you know, of that attention.
Before we move on to the listener questions, this is just something I'm curious about. Unpopular opinion, perhaps. Are there at least two levels at the CT between Idla Ferreira, Gabriel Medina, Carissa Moore, and the rest of the CT surfers?
I think you feel it. Yeah. I mean, 100%. It's even with the Olympic Games, watching Medina and Italo, how many times they'd throw themselves 15 feet into the air, into the flats, and get up and do it again. To be willing to put your body through that. I mean, we're not seeing surfers do that all the time. Anyone could try that if they have that platform, but no one's landing in the flats the way they do over and over again. And just their willingness to succeed is unbelievable. It's on another planet. And Carissa's dedication to success, I think she's always found, is in her head. Like, I think she's probably realizing now with this gold, #1 in the world, the run she's on. For my opinion, which is crazy, I think this might be the first time she might actually be like, I'm the best surfer in the world. I feel like she's like actually reached that, which for us, we're like, you could have said that a long time ago. But
sure, yeah.
I think I'm feeling the way that moment felt for her. I don't know. There's something about it. I think she's like, I bet she can say that without hesitating. I'm the best surfer in the world.
It's interesting too, because I actually totally agree with you. Like, I do think that maybe more so that at any point in her career, which is baffling since she's so accomplished, she actually may be feeling herself in the sense of like, I am the best surfer in the world. But she's also been forecasted for a long time to the surfing world. Like, we've known that she's coming, and that's relatively different to Gabriel and Felipe. I'm sorry, Felipe as well, but Gabriel and Italo, right? And I really think at least the Western surfing world is having to come to grips with, like, pound for pound at any venue. It's not beach breaks, it's not point breaks, it's not barrels. Like, at any venue, these are the two surfers to beat, which is really remarkable in the history of surfing when you think about it.
Well, that's what it's all about. And some people were asking me the difference between Olympic gold and a world title. And I'm like, well, this is like a category in surfing, being good at this beach break, where the championship on the World Surf League is all about being the best in everything. Reef breaks, small waves, reefs, points. You're the undisputed world champ at everything. You're not supposed to have a weakness. And I think Gabriel and Italo are defining that, you know, where they're in the final together at Pipeline, you know, and all of a sudden next event's 1 foot barely breaking in some heats, and they're still the guys to beat. They're still intimidating. They're still looking like the gnarliest guys in the world. Doesn't matter if it's pipe or if it's Tahiti, and that's a pretty scary prospect if you're trying to figure out a way to beat those guys right now.
So we did put out a call for questions to the Instagram community, and we got many back, and we've narrowed it down to 4. So in order, I Am Matson asks, have you been starstruck by any of the surf heroes you've met or announced with live?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, especially when I first started. I remember meeting Aki for the first time at J-Bay. That was surreal. It was just so cool becoming friends with him too. But just going, oh, like, I wasn't even ready for it. It was like, yeah, we're having a commentary meeting first time at J-Bay. I'm taking a lot in, you know, and it's like Aki's right there, and he's like, hey, mate. And he's just so nice and really cool. And I'm just going, you're Aki from the OP Pro. You know, no, just like, you know, it's just like, it was one of those moments where I was like, this is so cool. So yeah, that definitely happens. And, you know, I think first time I called to Heat with Kelly, that was really special. It was just kind of like, whoa, this is insane. I'm calling a heat with you. This is really cool. And also makes your job so rewarding as well.
Mashiono asks, how did you feel calling the Mick Fanning shark? It says accident, but I think that's a liberal phrasing of that. And can you walk us through your point of view of what happened in the moment?
Wow, great question. That definitely stands out as one of the craziest moments of my entire career. And luckily, I'm thankful that our old booth setup was we were in the 3rd story tower at J Bay. We weren't what we have now on the couch, because I wouldn't have been able to handle that moment as well. Because I had a view of Mick. There's that scary moment where a wave covers the shot, and I'm like on my tiptoes looking out the window. I can see him. And I think there's been all these little one-liners that have come from that call. Like, I see a little splash. I knew it was a shark. The last thing I was going to do was call play-by-play on a shark attack. That's just not what that was about. And you're just relying on instinct at this moment. This is nothing that you run through in broadcast practice, or we hadn't, and
Sure.
It was just all on instinct. I was thinking about Mick's mom, and all I wanted to do was see if he was okay, until the scariest thing if he wasn't, but he was, and I saw him swimming when that wave passed. So I just kept saying he's swimming on his own, right? Like, in his own ability to swim. And I just wanted to call, like, he was actually moving on his own. Like, that shows that he's okay. But my heart's in my throat, like my stomach's in knots. I can hear little screams from outside the booth of people in tears, seeing their hero. Like, they don't know what's going on. His board's falling away from him. It was so dramatic, man. I mean, that could have happened at so many places. Julian already got a wave. That could have happened then. They played a replay. That could have happened then.
Yeah.
It happened when he was being bioed and sitting there. It was just, it was so crazy on so many levels. And thankfully, it was the story that it is today, where we get to call Mick right now, and he's doing great. He didn't have a scratch, and I'll never forget that evening. People were giving speeches like you were at a wake.
Sure.
But he was right there. So I don't think he remembers how many times he got bear hugged, but that's definitely a moment I'll never forget.
Yeah, the way that unfolded with the broadcast was sort of Spielbergian, right? Like, I was in California. The twins were very, very young, so I wasn't sleeping, and I had nodded off in the second semifinal and just happened to at my desk and happened to wake up.
Oh my goodness!
Like right before the final, and I'm like, oh, all right, Mick and Julian, this will be cool. And I remember when it happened and thinking, like, I was so tired. I was like, that just happened. And then my lizard brain kicked in, and I'm like, well, he didn't get bit, so I don't even think we'll have to put a statement out. And then for like a whole 3 seconds, I'm like, I'm not gonna have to do any work. And then I'm like, this is gonna be a thing. But same deal. Like, it's like it was so dramatic and scary. What a moment.
Yeah, our flight home, I remember being in like a lounge. Everyone's talking about it. It's on every news channel, and our little crew that was there calling it or working on the event were just going, this is crazy.
It was the biggest sports story in the world for 36 hours. It's never happened before or since in surfing. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Multiple people wrote in with a form of this question, which is, what heats stick out as the most memorable you've ever had to call? I guess we'll move the Mick Fanning one off to the side because that probably is up there.
Yeah.
Which one stands out to you, if you can narrow it down?
There's a lot, and I get this asked a lot, and I love this question. I think there was a time I just kept going to the Tahiti semifinal. Kelly John decided in a tie break, and it was a 10 that broke the tie, and it was just this buildup of wanting to see John and Kelly in waves that size and that perfect. And so that was insane. I mean, I think that'll always go down as one of the greatest heats of all time. But also there's like the J-Bay final, Parko Mick, when it was pumping. And I think the ones that just feed all this energy was amazing. I'll never forget calling Adriano versus Taj Burrow in Rio. That was when it was at Baja da Tijuca before it moved to Saquarema, and the emotion from the crowd that I'd never felt before. I felt like our tower was moving. Every time Adriano got up, the crowd would erupt. Every time Taj got up, the crowd would boo, and Taj is their hero. They were like hugging him on the beach, but it was like that first time I felt the sporting element. Like if you're at a Dodger game, you're going to boo the Giants, you know?
Sure, yeah, of course.
If you're in my book. But it's like you are, it was so surreal to see that energy and passion for, we want this person to win and we're going to share it. And that was so cool to really feel. So I'll try to narrow it down to those three, but I can go further.
All right, last one from the Instagram community. I'm going to butcher this. Gearoid Marky 92 asks, have you ever been approached for voicing a Surf's Up character?
I wish. We watched that movie a lot at my house.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. That's like a dream of mine, to be like a cartoon character. So
I think there is actually like a Surf's Up 2. So maybe Surf's Up 3, they can update it and you'll get the call up.
Gosh, that would be
Kelly
wonderful.
and Rob and Salema are in the first one.
Yeah, I think Mike
they were
Parsons
penguins.
too, right? Yeah.
Snips, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, they're in it. Oh gosh, it's cool. We watch it quite a bit.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That always gets a yes when the kids are like, "Want to watch that?" I'm like, "Yeah."
Yeah, put it on. This is got a lot of redeeming value here.
Time for the final segment. This is the lightning round presented by Michelob Ultra Pure Gold. 10 questions. Answer as fast as you can. If you could only have one board set up for the rest of your life, single fin, twin fin, thruster, quad bonzer, or finless, what would you choose?
Thruster.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Burrito or pizza?
Burrito.
Last book you read?
Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey.
Best surf film ever?
Endless Summer.
One wave you never have to go back to?
Venice Breakwater.
If you only get to surf one wave the rest of your life?
Oh, fast, right? Oh,
No, you're doing this is fastest we've ever done.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I just had a moment. There's so many good waves. Somewhere in Fiji. Name any of them. Yeah, Fiji.
Best person to share a lineup with?
Family.
Worst person to share a lineup with?
Oh gosh, I can't say their name. I was surfing in West Oz. They work for the WSL. We can't talk about this. Yeah, we can.
Do they still work here?
They still do. And they're wonderful. But it was really funny. Just I'm going too long in the lightning round.
No, this is good.
But
Keep going.
we were in West Oz, surfing a little wave. I was by myself, got joined, which is always a welcoming thing in the West.
Of course.
And it was a great high,
a game of
hello,
probability out
and
there.
sort of went right around me, got a wave. And I was like, oh, well, that happens, you know. Paddled back out, continued the conversation, and it just kept happening. Just these little sneaky paddling around you moments. And I was kind of going, oh, man, this is not going to be a fun session anymore. But I love them anyway. They're great. And, you know, that was just a tough run that day.
That's a great answer. For the final question, final one. Finish this sentence. I will next achieve a state of happiness by...
Hugging my daughter.
Good man. Joe Turpel, thank you so much for coming on the lineup. Everyone look out for the Ultimate Surfer After Show podcast. I think that's what it's called. It's going to be in the lineup feed. It's going to feature Joe Turpel, Cassie Randolph, our own producer, Ryan Fawcett. It's going to be not miss content for sure. And man, we'll look forward to listening to you call the game down in Mexico, Tahiti, and at the Rip Curl WSL Finals in September. Thanks again, Joe.
Unreal, Dave. Thanks so much for having me. Had a blast.